Hello and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, then a little introduction. This is a place to share stories, adventures, and everything I wish I had known before embarking on them. My name is Gina, and you're watching From Fiji to Here. We are approaching the end of this series, and in turn, the end of the pregnancy journey, going out with a bang with labor and delivery. Now, personally, preparing for my own labor, I watched a gazillion birth vlogs and read up on birth stories and just wanted to know everything I could to try and feel prepared for the labor experience. And from that, I'm just gonna say it. No matter how much you prepare, you might never feel ready for labor and delivery. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you can't do it. Right off the bat, before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I want to squash the stigma between C-section and vaginal delivery. The most important thing at the end of the day is that you and baby are safe and healthy. And whether this is something that you're a judgment that you're facing currently, or it's a deep-seated stigma that you didn't even know you had, that you feel this internal conflict with, we'll get more into that when we talk about my own birth story. How do you try and feel prepared for labor and delivery? The first thing I would recommend is to create a birth plan and be prepared for none of it to go as planned. I think it's important to do one just so that you've, taken the time to research your options and things that may be offered to you, like delayed cord clamping, a predicted golden hour, the benefits of skin to skin right away, just all these different things. So you have an idea of what they are, and when they're offered to you, you're not kind of deer in the headlights. But definitely be prepared that some of those things may no longer be offered depending on the route that your labor goes. Going into that, something that you want to include in your birth plan is whether or not you feel strongly about an unmedicated delivery or a epidural. And this isn't just so that your support team and your partner know where your stance is on that, but also so that they can have the resources available. If you're sure you want an epidural, you're going to want to make sure that there's an anesthesiologist on site who's able to provide that when you're ready for it. The next thing I'd recommend to try and feel more prepared is to take a course. This is especially the case if you would like to do an unmedicated vaginal delivery. You're going to want as many tools in your toolbox to kind of get through that labor process. So things like a hypnobirthing course or just any kind of pain management techniques. They tend to have birthing courses that are kind of a one-stop shop for a comprehensive list of different tools that you can use to try and cope with pain management. The third thing is to know the hospital restrictions and services. If you are set on having a water birth, you're going to want to make sure that the hospital is able to facilitate that. You don't want to be set on one thing and then show up and realize that they don't even have tubs, for example. It'll just completely throw off your headspace. Similarly, you'll want to find out if they have resources like labor balls, peanut balls, whatever you want to call them, as well as if you're allowed to eat during labor, if you need to bring your own snacks. Are all the rooms private, or do you have to request that in advance? Is there a cost associated with that? When it comes to restrictions, especially since COVID, you're going to want to find out in advance who can come to the hospital with you. It would be a shame to hire a doula and work with them through your pregnancy just to find out at the hospital that you can only have your partner or a doula and not both. Other questions regarding the hospital are what products or supplies are provided for you and what are you expected to bring? Are there visitor restrictions for afterbirth? So can you have people like your family, your friends, whatnot, come and visit the baby? Or do they have to wait until you come home? Or do you even want them to? Maybe set that expectation really clearly, whether you will be accepting visitors. Also, adding into this, what is the postpartum experience like? So if you have a vaginal delivery, how long are you expected to stay in hospital post-birth? Similarly, if you have a C-section, often C-section deliveries have to stay a little longer in hospital after delivery. Also, even if you're planning on a vaginal delivery, I would go ahead and pack for a C-section delivery regarding time length, because even the best laid plans go out the window when it comes to delivery, and it would suck to only have one pair of underwear and be stuck there for 3 to 5 days. So what can you expect? As we say in almost every video, this is going to vary for every labor. Generally speaking, you'll go through the stages of early labor, active labor, birth of the baby, birth of the placenta, and then you have your after labor period. Early labor is often the longest stage, and it can last from hours to days depending on how quickly you progress. During this stage, contractions may start as you begin dilation, but probably only about 20 minutes or so. Sometimes they're not very consistent. But once they're coming every about 5-ish minutes, lasting for about a minute or so, is when most healthcare practitioners suggest it's a good idea to start heading to the hospital, because that's usually around when you're about 4 centimeters dilated and progressing into active labor. I just want to say I don't recommend waiting for your water to break. You see in the movies that this is always like the, oh my gosh, we have to rush to the hospital, her water just broke. The majority of women's water does not break during the early stages of labor. In fact, for a lot of women, it doesn't happen until they're pushing the baby out, or they have their water broken by a medical professional in order to help progress labor along. Some babies are even born in a non-perforated sac. That's pretty cool. That's a lot more rare, but just don't rely on your water breaking to be deciding to go to the hospital. As you progress into the active labor stage, things can pick up, and this is where you're really going to want to go into your toolbox and use things to kind of help you with the discomfort and the pain. This toolkit, again, varies for everyone, and it may not all be like physical items. Some people use like birthing balls, cool cloths, a fan, but maybe this entails pulling out lessons that you learned through a birthing class or hypnobirthing video or anything like that, just to really help you get into that kind of zen place to try and just like, as I say, like ride the waves. Yeah. This is also the phase when most epidurals will take place, usually somewhere between 6 and 8 centimeters dilated. After 8 centimeters, things can progress really quickly. So if you wait until then, you're pushing, maybe not having a chance to get an epidural before baby's born. As for the birth of baby in the placenta, I'll let you do your own research. I'm not a medical professional to go into that depth, and I personally haven't had a vaginal delivery to give any insight on that. What I can give you is my own labor and delivery story with Ellissa. If this is not your cup of tea, I'm going to put a timestamp here to just skip over this part. It was a cold winter's day. The world was dark. Okay, that's enough of the drama. We'll leave it for later in the story. In reality, this story starts on my due date when I was scheduled to see my doctor. I went in and it showed I was like nowhere near having this baby. I was barely 1 centimeter dilated, and although she was positioned correctly, she was still very high up and comfortable. So we went ahead and scheduled an induction date for a week later, and I did what I tend to do when I'm emotional, and we went to Costco. Yep. The next day, I walked pretty much the entire day, all of the aisles of Costco. I think we went to like Canadian Tire and Winners. Like we just walked everywhere. And then we got home, and even after dinner, Dally and I went out for like our nightly walk and walked up and down the hills of Halifax looking at Christmas lights. The next morning, not surprisingly looking back, I woke up probably around 4:30 a.m. Kind of like abruptly with just kind of a strange feeling. Up until this point, like I hadn't had any spotting or bleeding or anything throughout pregnancy. So when I went to the bathroom, it kind of looked like I guess like lost my mucus plug. There was quite a bit of bleeding, and it just was kind of like, it kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't entirely sure what was like normal or what to expect. So like I said, I just waited about an hour, and when I noticed that like Ellissa wasn't moving as much is when I called early labor, like the early labor department at the hospital, kind of talked with them. I woke up Dally, and we decided to go in just to get Ellissa monitored. So as Dally and I got ready to go to the hospital, he asked me if we should bring the hospital bags. And I very strongly responded like, no, we're just going to go get checked out. There's no way I'm in labor, and there's no way I'm far enough along to get admitted. Which, like, foreshadowing, because it was kind of half true. So we walked to the hospital. Yes, we walked. We only lived 2 blocks from the hospital. Like I said, like I wasn't really in any pain or anything. So we just casually strolled to the hospital at like 6 a.m. And when we got there, everything seemed fine. Baby was good, moving, just not as much. But they wanted to do some blood work and a urine sample. And this is what changed the whole plan. So at about 6:30 a.m., I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. And I was told that they would be sending me upstairs to be induced, and we were having babies that day. We were like super excited, called family and friends, like, told people, and Dally walked home to get the bags, begrudgingly, that I said to leave at home. At about 10 a.m., I was still not admitted, but I was checked and it was confirmed that I had progressed to 4 centimeters dilated. So at this point, we were like in pretty good spirits. We were like, this is happening, yay, like still kind of adrenaline rush, I guess. And as the day moved forward, things just kind of like went downhill. We were stuck in a tiny room, like maybe the size of this queen size bed, to be quite frank. Okay, well, I guess, or this is a king size bed, but also it would have been like a little bigger because there was a stretcher, but that was it. Like there was no bathroom in there. You could pace, like, I remember just pacing like 6 feet one way, 6 feet the other way. Because of COVID restrictions, they didn't want us walking around the halls, so there was very little room to move. I was not offered anything like a labor ball. There was no food. I did keep getting water. Like I had to send Dally out to the water fountain to restock my water. But this went on and on. And I want to reiterate that, like, I'm not expecting it to be all super quick and dandy and whatnot. But we were told that I could not leave the hospital because I was being admitted. And I was going to be moved upstairs to a birthing room where they have all these things like birthing balls and a birthing tub and a shower, and it's a huge room so you can actually move around and like try and get comfortable. And this is why, like, in hindsight, I encourage you guys to advocate for yourselves, because like just know to ask. Like, ask for what it is that you need. At about 7 p.m. so keeping in mind, we've been there now for like more than 12 hours, stuck in this tiny room. At 7 p.m., things were kind of like picking it up. There was a change in shifts, and I was in active, like starting to get into active labor there, and actively in pain and still not admitted. Like at this point, I was just pissed, to be honest. I was told that I could not leave the hospital to go and labor in the comfort of my own home that was like literally 2 blocks away, because I was high risk because of the preeclampsia. But no one came to check on me for 3 to 4 hour stretches. Like, not on me, not on baby, not on my blood pressure. And then I was stuck in this little room. I was told I was going to be admitted at 10 a.m. It's now 7 p.m. No update, like, throughout that time. Like, people just didn't tell us anything. And so when I was assigned a new nurse, I kind of expressed some of these concerns, and I just got moved to another room in early labor that at least had a birthing tub. It was a little bigger. They did give me a birthing ball. I had a labor tub. I was grateful for the switch in rooms, but I was like almost even more mad that this wasn't offered earlier, like, so that I could have room to walk and like just have these resources. So that kind of frustrated me. And of course, like at this point, like I'm going into like active labor, and I was not provided like pain relief of any kind, because you cannot get an epidural unless you are admitted. And I was still in early labor. Okay, so got there at 6 a.m., still in early labor. By 11 p.m., I was very vocal about my frustrations and pain, and upon being checked, I was 7 centimeters dilated. At this point, I was finally admitted upstairs. And really, I was admitted upstairs because, like, I wanted an epidural. I got the epidural as soon as I got upstairs. They went ahead and broke my water to help progress labor. But honestly, like, I was just exhausted. Like, Dally and I were absolutely exhausted. We both tried to get some sleep once I had kind of the relief of the epidural. And my nurse snuck me in some Jell-O because, again, I hadn't eaten. By 4 a.m., I was 10 centimeters dilated. So, in theory, my labor, like from, I guess, 24 hours would be like my labor from the time that I woke up at home and was like, oh, something's off, to when I reached 10 centimeters. We had the most amazing nurses in the birth unit, not early labor, but once we were admitted. And she essentially told me that we could continue resting up for like 2 hours to kind of like let things progress. Like, it was 10 centimeters dilated, but we could kind of like let things progress a little longer to try and give me some time to like pretty much just like store up some energy for the delivery process. And sure enough, at 6 a.m., I started pushing. Now, something I didn't know is that for delivery, depending on your epidural, like, and the strength, you can kind of move. So after about an hour of pushing in like the traditional position or whatever, I did actually rotate to be on my hands and knees, and this was like a much more comfortable position. However, this is when things started to take a turn. The pain was just like increasingly unbearable, and the treatment I was receiving from the resident on staff was just, we'll just say it was just not up to my standards. And I have nothing against teaching hospitals at all. Everyone has to learn through experience. However, this is a hospital that like I worked in, and I wasn't thrilled to have residents on my case to begin with. So in short, they were trying to figure out why the delivery was not progressing. So they tried using an ultrasound, and they tried doing checks, which I had no problem when like the nurses and other physicians did like their cervical checks before, but this particular OB resident, it was like excruciatingly painful. So when I told her to stop and that I wouldn't be allowing her to do a check again, she responded with, if I wouldn't allow her to do a cervical exam, they would have to take me to the OR just to get checked. And I looked her dead in the eye and said, bring me the paperwork. Needless to say, I did not see this resident again. It was her supervising staff that I met in the OR after pushing for 2 hours, which is where it was discovered that Ellissa was stuck. Like, really stuck. She was on an angle trying to get through the birthing canal. So not just like shoulder stuck or whatnot. If you've seen any pictures of Ellissa as a newborn, she has this like huge lump on her head, and it kind of gives you an idea of like how she was trying to get through, and it like her head, instead of being straight on, was like this and like pushing. So wasn't gonna work. When it was assessed that like there was no way she was coming down, the safest route was to go with a C-section. At this point, Elissa's heart was a little bit kind of like, they were having issues trying to find her heartbeat. So they were like, hey, that's the safest route. Let's just go ahead. Because we were already in the OR and prepped, the transition was like quick. So it was just after 8 a.m. when I signed the papers to go to the OR, and by 9:08 a.m. Ellissa was born. It helped that I already had the epidural in place and that we were already in the OR. All that being said, there were complications. As I mentioned, Ellissa was stuck, which meant that when they tried to pull her out manually via the C-section scar, she still wouldn't come, and they had to use the vacuum through the C-section, if that makes sense, like a vacuum C-section essentially, in order to remove her. This resulted in, from my understanding, what is a uterine tear, where the uterus tears a bit from the surrounding muscles, which is why for any future pregnancies or deliveries or whatnot, I would not be recommended to labor naturally, in case that kind of happened while I was laboring and would cause incredible internal bleeding. So in the future, highly recommended to have C-sections and not do a VBAC. Other things that happened, there was a lack of communication. That meant that when this uterine tear happened and they had to extend the incision, no one told the anesthesiologist, and it did kind of lead to some pain. Like at this point, I'm not gonna lie, everything is a little blurry for me. I just remember my doctor's face coming like over the plastic curtain, and her asking me like, are you saying ow? And then things kind of like just got really chaotic, where she was like, she's feeling pain, and they were like, what? And then the anesthesiologist like started upping things, which made me feel like I was gonna vomit. At this point, I told Dally, like, poor Dally, I remember like looking over and he's sitting like in the corner holding this baby, like, what's happening? Cause yeah, at that, like, Ellissa had been on my chest, and I said, like, you know, I don't feel good. You need to take her aside. Which like also I feel like bringing up, if you're not aware, some babies when they're born are often kind of a purplish tinge, because it's that crying that allows the oxygen to like give them the pink color as their blood gets oxygenated through their body and whatnot. Dally was unaware of this and was a little concerned when Ellissa came out like a purple hue. However, she was screaming bloody murder, so like I felt fine. I was like, oh good, she's like screaming. That also being said, like we had so many doctors in the OR, we had the NICU team, we had everybody, so I felt pretty safe about that. This whole situation though, I have nothing to say about delivering a placenta. Yeah, I was clocked out. Like I was there, but like no idea when the placenta was removed. Yeah, so I recommend watching other videos, especially if you want to have a vaginal delivery, because that's probably not very helpful. But I really want to point out that like my recovery was pretty much flawless, and like we've had no complications since. Like both me and baby, well, not so baby now, Ellissa, are healthy. At the end of the day, that's what matters. Which ties into the fact that like there is a grief that comes when your plans don't go as you had hoped. I will literally be like the first person to admit that. You can be over the moon happy and grateful that you and your little bundle of joy made it out healthy and safe. But at the same time, you can grieve the experience that you thought you were going to have and that you longed for and just didn't have. It doesn't make you any less of a mother for having endured a C-section, for not breastfeeding, for choosing to formula feed, for hiring a night nurse, or using disposable diapers instead of cloth diapers. Whatever it may be that went differently than what you thought you were going to do, it's okay to have a multitude of feelings about it. And it's okay if it takes time to work through them. Like, Ellissa was almost a year old when I had, like, for lack of a better word, a relapse on the, like, should've, could've's, whatevs, when we literally went to a friend's house who had just had a baby, and she, like, the mother told me that they were also told that they couldn't leave the hospital to go get their, like, hospital bags, and she signed an AMA, which is, pretty much a letter that says, like, leaving against medical advice. She signed it to go get her bags and come back. Like, she was like, I know I'm going to come back for the safety of my baby. And I did have this flood of emotions saying, like, you worked in healthcare. Why didn't you think of signing an AMA to go home and then come back? And, like, your mom's a nurse. She could have told you when your blood pressure was too high. Like, so many things just that, like, flooded me and were like, maybe then you could have had a vaginal delivery. And, like, maybe then Ellissa would have been in a better position to have not gotten stuck. And, like, all this, like, maybe then the list could go on forever. At some point, you just have to find peace with what it is. Life happens between the plans that you make. And with that, we're going to leave it here. If you have any questions, do leave them down below, as well as any other videos you'd be interested in seeing. Also, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, as it really does support my channel. And hit the subscribe button if you want to be notified of future videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.